All right, so over the past few weeks, I've really been getting a wave of phone calls, emails, text messages asking me what the hell is happening to our schools here in Massachusetts. And to be honest with you, I don't think it's very surprising because parents across the Commonwealth are both fed up and they're also simultaneously confused, as am I, or at least as I was. So I've touched on some of this before when I went and I did the video on the Natick school system regarding a document about the identity in America. And that was a class that was presented content framing white people as oppressors and challenged the idea of meritocracy as a potential myth. It all started from there. And if you remember, I did a live stream a couple weeks ago. And during that live stream, that video on Natick was enough to trigger whether it be students or faculty members or staff, whatever it may be, to completely firebomb the chat. So I will tell you, as a concerned parent of two young children as well, something is going on here. And I plan on covering this in its entirety because I truly believe that these schools, they have stopped teaching students how to think. And now they are in the business of teaching them what to think. And I have a huge problem with that. So I would say with that out of the way, today I want to talk a little bit about what went wrong at one of America's most elite universities and why Harvard just got hit with one of the most, I would say, scathing internal reports in its 380 plus year history. Because you need to look, I would say, beyond the headlines of what's going on here. And that's what I'm going to expose to you today. This isn't just about protests or free speech. This is about how one of the most powerful universities literally in the world basically built a culture so ideologically rigid and so morally confused that it seems as though it became incapable of calling out terrorism without hedging it against or asking whether the victims deserved it. Okay. And now what's happening is Harvard is collapsing in front of all of us in real time. There are donors that are walking away. The students have become completely and utterly radicalized. So the Trump administration, they are freezing, or they are in the process of trying to freeze key federal funding. And Congress is now turning up the pressure with investigations and potential legislative action. And Harvard, the place that once trained presidents, Nobel Prize winners, CEOs, they have become, I would say, ground zero in a national debate about whether our schools are educating these young kids or these young minds, or essentially indoctrinating them into a worldview that excuses hate when it comes from the right side of the narrative. That's pretty much the best way that I could put this. And this all started back in October. I think it was the first week of October in 2023. And that is when Hamas carried out, one of the deadliest single-day massacres of Jewish people since the Holocaust. But instead of like a moment of, moral clarity, let's call it that, what we got from Harvard was a moment of this moral confusion. 34 student groups signed a letter blaming Israel entirely for the violence before the bodies of the victims were even buried. That's what happened here. And there was no mention of, let's say the rape. There was no mention of, burned small children or babies, right? Like crazy, absolutely crazy stuff. It was just a flat out justification of terror in the name of decolonization. And what they did was nothing. Harvard did not do anything at first. They did absolutely nothing. It was really just complete silence. Then there was this vague statement about some levels of heartbreak. Who knows? It wasn't until days later, after they received massive backlash from the public, people like you, and this problem, it completely exploded online. And that's when the administration, they finally condemned the attacks. But by then, you could say that the damage was already done. The damage is done, right? It's out there. It was done. So what happened is donors like the Wexner Foundation, they cut their ties, and that was probably one of their bigger donors. So a doxing truck even circled the campus. Billionaires even vowed to blacklist the students. And former Harvard president Claudine Gay found herself in front of Congress, if you remember, and she was basically unable to answer the simplest of questions, right? And that was, does calling for the genocide of Jewish people violate Harvard's codes of conduct? But the real question isn't why she failed to answer the question. I think that the real question is, why was that even a hard question to answer in the first place, right? So, and the answer, when you think about this, the answer lies in what's, let's say, been building for years on these elite college campuses. You see, what happens is, for a better part of a decade, Harvard and schools like it, they have restructured their value system around a new ideological framework. And that is one that emphasizes group identity above all else. And, you know, where I would say some levels of lived experience outweighs objective truth. And everything is seen through this like single moral lens, which in my opinion is the powerful versus the powerless. Okay. So on paper, what they did sounds somewhat like justice. Who wouldn't want, let's say, fairness, inclusion, or some levels of understanding? But in practice, it turned into a kind of dogma here where nuance dies, okay? And where these complex conflicts are flattened into some levels of slogans. So when students justified the terror and cheered for violence, they weren't necessarily rebelling against their education. They were pretty much embodying it. And I'm going to explain why in a little bit here. They were, again, in my opinion, they were simply reflecting the lessons that they've absorbed from a system that no longer teaches critical thinking, but critical theory. And when you think about it, that's the part that no one wants to say out loud. This didn't just come out of nowhere, guys. It's coming from these classrooms. It's a huge problem. And it's not only the classrooms, it's from faculty who were seen supporting protests. And in some cases, they were even canceling class lectures or modifying class times to participate in these protests. And, you know, when you think about it, these are from administrators who, according to some student reports that I was reading, discouraged Holocaust-related personal stories over concerns they might be considered triggering. So, Harvard's own anti-Semitism task force said it point blank. They said students with anti-Semitic or anti-Israel bias were getting in, and once they got there, no one challenged what they perceived to be their own assumptions. In fact, they were pretty much rewarded for it. Meanwhile, the very campus offices that are supposed to foster some levels of safety and inclusion ended up turning, let's say, a blind eye to this anti-Semitism. That's what happened here. They didn't recognize it. They didn't prioritize it. And that's because in this new social hierarchy that's taken over this education here, based on their deductions, Jewish students simply just didn't rank enough. That's what I think. So that's why I think that a lot of people, many people, felt isolated when they were targeted. That's why the faculty could single them out in lectures with zero consequences. And by the way, This is not only happening in Harvard, right, or in Massachusetts in general, because even at Columbia and Stanford, each had their own version of this breakdown happen as well. But what happened is, when it's Harvard that's involved, their failure is the most public because they're the most, let's say, notable brand, right? And it's the most symbolic because for generations, it sold the world on an idea that it was the gold standard of American education. But now Harvard is effectively scrambling, right? They've got a task force. They've got a task force now. They're talking about viewpoint diversity. They are promising to review the curriculum. They're going to revise their admissions and maybe even fire faculty who abuse their classrooms for some levels of political activism. And I believe that they're doing that because they see what's happening to these kids who are super, super impressionable. Let's be real here, guys, for a second. You don't fix this problem or this deep of a problem with a few memos and a PR campaign. You fix it by asking hard questions. What kind of students are they selecting at Harvard? What kind of faculty is Harvard promoting? Because let's be honest, this isn't just about anti-Semitism, although that is a huge issue. And it's obviously the most visible symptom. But underneath that, in my opinion, is this like deeper sickness. And that is a loss of moral clarity and a belief that all truth is relative unless it offends the wrong group. And that is the problem here. And once a university starts operating like that and they start doing these things, it stops being a university and starts becoming this echo chamber. And that's all that it is. It just becomes this echo chamber. And that's precisely why I believe Congress is getting involved in this. That's why their federal funding has been potentially frozen. I mean, you know, it's bad when people, or I should say it's bad even when people on the political left are starting to speak out on this, because normally they would not touch a topic like this. And if places like Harvard can't stand up to some levels of hate, why are they still standing at all? These kids are lost in a system that taught them that the world is black and white and that violence can be justified if it's aimed at the right people, so long as it's wrapped up in language of political justice. And that is what's happening here. That's why Harvard, I think, to some extent, has to have some changes, not just because it's losing donors or because it's facing lawsuits or basically because it's getting grilled by Congress, but because it's producing these, what I would think are these smart, intelligent kids who are becoming morally blind. And that is the biggest issue of all. And what's happening now is that parents from all over the place, because this extends beyond Harvard, parents all over the place are starting to recognize this pattern. And this pattern is that these kids are going into these institutions or coming out of grade school or high school and then getting pigeonholed into these, these colleges here. And over the course of time, these teachers and these faculties and these administrators keep on pushing the same exact rhetoric. And what happens is once these kids come out of school and you get them back into your home briefly, let's say until they get a job, they're not the same person as they are as when they left. And that's a huge problem because all of the morals and everything that these parents did to instill in these kids and these children is completely wiped away. And it's wiped away from these administrators, from these teachers. It's just a crazy, crazy circumstances. And these kids should not be involved in this like political crusade that is subvertly being, let's say, held at these universities or starting in grade school or starting in high school. It's ridiculous to me. So that's why I plan on covering this more thoroughly. And that's why I will tell you, if you have a child that's at a school and something is going on, and I know that you guys are out there, be brave enough to come and talk to me, okay? Be brave enough to send me an email. I'm going to pin a comment in the description or in the comment section below. I won't name any names. You could be completely anonymous. It doesn't matter to me. But what I want the opportunity to do is to see if there's anything I could do to try to help, because I can't just sit aside knowing what's going on. I can't just sit on the sidelines and watch other parents suffer. I can't do that. I just morally cannot do that. So again, look at the top of the comment section. If you know of something that's going on, whether it be at a university, a grade school, a middle school, or a high school, please reach out to me and let me know. That's it for today's video, guys. I'll see you on the next one. Bye-bye.